Michael Carter walked through the jet bridge at Chicago O'Hare International Airport with his daughter's purple backpack slung over one shoulder. The fabric was faded from years of use, decorated with peeling stickers of cartoon characters she'd loved when she was younger. He hadn't bothered changing it out. It still worked fine, and Emma had insisted he take it on this trip. Something about keeping her close while he was away. The flight to San Francisco was supposed to be simple. Board, sit, work through emails, land. He had a meeting scheduled with the logistics division the next morning. Nothing urgent, just routine oversight. His assistant had booked the ticket weeks ago, first-class seat, 2A, window seat. He preferred being able to look out during takeoff. When he stepped into the first-class cabin, the air smelled like leather and expensive cologne. A few passengers were already settled in, scrolling through phones or adjusting noise-canceling headphones. Michael moved down the narrow aisle, checking the seat numbers embossed in silver above each row. 1A, 1B, 1C, then 2A. A woman sat in his seat. She wore a cream-colored blazer with sharp shoulders and gold jewelry that caught the overhead lights. Her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. A designer handbag rested on the seat beside her, taking up space meant for another passenger. She didn't look up when Michael stopped next to the row. He glanced at his boarding pass again, confirming what he already knew. Seat 2A. He cleared his throat gently. The woman's eyes flicked up, irritation already forming before he said a word. Michael kept his voice calm and polite. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my assigned seat." He held up the boarding pass so she could see the printed confirmation. She looked at the pass, then at him. Her gaze traveled from the worn backpack to his plain gray Henley and jeans. No logos, no watch that cost more than a car payment, nothing that signaled he belonged in this part of the plane. Her expression shifted from irritation to something colder. Vanessa Reynolds didn't move from the seat. "There must be some mistake. I specifically requested this seat when I checked in. There's no way the airline would have double-booked first class." Her tone suggested the mistake was his, not the system's. Michael tried again. "My ticket clearly shows 2A. Perhaps you could check your own boarding pass to see where you're actually assigned." He kept his voice even, aware that other passengers were starting to glance over. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to check anything. I've flown this route dozens of times and know exactly how these things work." Then she said something that made the cabin feel smaller. "Maybe you've gotten confused about which class you're supposed to be in. Economy is toward the back of the plane." The words landed with precision. A couple in the row ahead turned to stare. Someone across the aisle pulled out a phone, angling it toward the confrontation. Michael felt the weight of their attention but didn't react. He'd been in boardrooms where people tried to intimidate him with far more sophistication than this. "This is my seat," he said again calmly. He showed her the boarding pass a second time, holding it steady so she couldn't claim she hadn't seen it properly. Vanessa's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You clearly don't understand how things work up here." Then she raised her voice just enough to carry through the cabin. "You need to stop harassing me and find your actual seat before I call someone to deal with you." A flight attendant appeared at the front of the cabin, drawn by the commotion. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of polished appearance that came from training videos and employee handbooks. She approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Is everything all right?" The attendant's gaze moved between Michael and Vanessa, trying to assess the situation without taking sides too quickly. Vanessa spoke first. "There's a man trying to claim my seat, and I'm starting to feel uncomfortable." She emphasized the word uncomfortable, letting it hang in the air like a threat. "I don't know where he came from, but he clearly doesn't have a first-class ticket." Michael handed the flight attendant his boarding pass without being asked. She scanned it, her eyes moving over the printed details. "Seat 2A, confirmation number, frequent flyer status, everything in order." "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass as well?" the attendant asked Vanessa. "I shouldn't have to prove anything," Vanessa snapped. "This is ridiculous. The airline should be protecting me from people who clearly don't belong in first class." She made a point of looking at Michael's backpack again, letting her disdain show. Other passengers were watching now. Phones were out. Someone was definitely recording. Michael could feel the situation escalating in a way that had nothing to do with facts and everything to do with perception. He'd seen it happen before, how quickly a narrative could form and harden into something unshakable. The flight attendant seemed caught between protocol and instinct. "Ma'am, Please show me your boarding pass so we can resolve this quickly. Vanessa's expression turned icy. I've flown with this airline for years. My husband has significant business relationships with the company. I expect to be treated with respect. She didn't produce a boarding pass. Then she said something that changed the temperature in the cabin. I don't feel safe with this man standing over me. He's being aggressive, and security needs to be called immediately. Michael hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved closer, hadn't done anything except stand in the aisle with his boarding pass and wait for the situation to be resolved. But the accusation was out there now, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras. Aggressive. Unsafe. The word stuck to him like oil. The flight attendant's face shifted. She was thinking about liability now, about company policy, about what would happen if she made the wrong call. Sir, perhaps it would be best if you waited near the front of the cabin while I sort this out with my supervisor. It was a polite way of removing him from the situation. A polite way of treating him like the problem. Michael looked at the attendant, then at Vanessa, who had settled back into the seat with an expression of vindicated satisfaction. He could argue. He could insist. He could demand they verify everything right now. But he knew how that would look. The man in the cheap backpack making a scene, refusing to comply, proving every assumption they'd already made about him. He had a choice. Push back and risk being labeled a troublemaker, maybe even removed from the flight entirely, or step aside and let the system handle it. Let the facts speak for themselves, even if it meant swallowing the humiliation of being doubted in the first place. Michael stepped back from the row. He didn't move to the front of the cabin like the attendant suggested. He stayed in the aisle a few feet away, holding his boarding pass in plain view. He didn't sit, didn't speak, just waited. The flight attendant seemed relieved that he'd complied, at least partially. She moved toward the cockpit area, presumably to get her supervisor. Vanessa turned her attention to her phone, scrolling through messages as if the disruption had already been forgotten. But the other passengers kept watching. The phone stayed out. And Michael stood there, silent and still, refusing to make it easy for anyone to dismiss him. He wasn't going to argue his way into being believed. He was going to make them confront the truth on their own terms. The supervisor arrived 2 minutes later, a man in his 50s with the kind of weathered professionalism that came from decades of handling passenger conflicts. He listened to the flight attendant's summary, glanced at Michael, then approached Vanessa. Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass, please. This time the request wasn't optional. Vanessa bristled. This is outrageous. I'm being treated like a criminal, and my husband will be hearing about this. But the supervisor didn't back down. He simply repeated the request. Finally, Vanessa reached into her handbag and pulled out her boarding pass. She handed it over with a sharp motion, as if the act itself was beneath her. The supervisor looked at it. Then he looked at Michael's boarding pass, which the flight attendant still held. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Ma'am, your assigned seat is 4C, not 2A. Vanessa's face went rigid. She started to say something about requesting a change, about being told she could sit wherever she wanted, but the supervisor cut her off. Seat changes have to be processed through the gate agent, and first class is fully booked. There are no open seats to move into. I need you to gather your belongings and move to your assigned seat so the flight can finish boarding. Vanessa didn't move immediately. She looked at Michael, her eyes hard and bright with something close to fury. This isn't over. I'll be filing a complaint. The way I've been treated is completely unacceptable. The supervisor told her calmly that she was welcome to file whatever complaint she wanted, but right now she needed to move to seat 4C. Vanessa stood. She grabbed her handbag with enough force to make the leather creak. As she moved past Michael, she leaned in just close enough for him to hear her next words. You might have won this time, but people like you don't last long in places like this. Then she walked down the aisle toward row 4, her heels clicking against the floor. Michael finally sat down in seat 2A. He placed the backpack under the seat in front of him and fastened his seatbelt. The flight attendant offered an apology that sounded rehearsed, something about misunderstandings and appreciation for his patience. He nodded but didn't respond. The cabin had gone quiet again, passengers returning to their phones and magazines, the confrontation already fading into background noise. But Michael could still feel the tension in his chest, the slow burn of being judged and dismissed based on nothing more than appearances. He looked out the window at the tarmac, watching ground crew load baggage into the hold. In a few hours, he'd land in San Francisco. He'd go to his meeting. He'd sign off on contracts and logistics reports, and no one in that room would have any idea what had just happened on this plane. But Vanessa would, and soon she'd know exactly who he was. The plane began its taxi toward the runway. Michael pulled out his laptop, balancing it on the tray table as the flight attendants moved through their safety demonstration. He had emails to answer, reports to review. The incident with Vanessa should have been over. She was in her assigned seat. He was in his. The problem was solved. But 20 minutes into the flight, after they'd reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign had chimed off, Michael noticed the flight attendant from earlier speaking quietly with another crew member near the galley. They kept glancing back toward his row. Not at Vanessa in 4C, but at him. The supervisor approached again, this time with a different expression, less certain, more cautious. He stopped next to Michael's seat and asked if he could have a word. Michael closed his laptop and looked up. There's been a complaint filed, the supervisor explained, and airport security has requested we verify passenger information before landing. What kind of complaint? Michael asked. The supervisor's discomfort was visible now. Another passenger has expressed concerns about threatening behavior. The airline has a policy of taking such reports seriously. He emphasized that this was just a formality, a precaution, nothing personal. Michael understood immediately what was happening. Vanessa hadn't let it go. She'd escalated, turned her embarrassment into a formal accusation. The supervisor asked to see Michael's identification along with his boarding pass. Michael handed over his driver's license without argument. The supervisor studied it, compared it against the reservation, then handed it back. Everything appears to be in order, but security will likely want to speak with you once we land in San Francisco. Just routine follow-up. Michael thanked him for the information and reopened his laptop. The supervisor hesitated before walking away, as if he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the right words. When he finally left, Michael noticed other passengers watching again. The woman across the aisle, the businessman one row back. They'd all heard enough to know that something was still wrong, that the man in the worn backpack was somehow still the problem. Michael tried to focus on his work, but his attention kept drifting to the implications. Security involvement meant documentation, reports, potential escalation if Vanessa decided to push harder. He thought about Emma, about how she'd react if she saw her father on the news or social media, accused of something he didn't do. 2 rows behind him, Vanessa was on her phone. The airplane Wi-Fi was spotty, but she'd managed to connect. Michael couldn't see what she was typing, but he could see the intensity in her posture, the way her fingers moved rapidly across the screen. When the plane landed at San Francisco International, the captain's voice came over the intercom, asking all passengers to remain seated. He explained that they needed to complete a brief administrative process before deplaning could begin. The announcement was met with groans and confused murmurs. 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. They were professional, calm, but their presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Passengers who'd been gathering their bags sat back down. The officers spoke briefly with the flight supervisor, then made their way down the aisle toward Michael. The first officer, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, asked Michael to confirm his name. He did. She asked if he'd had any altercation with another passenger during boarding. Michael explained what had happened, keeping his voice neutral and factual. The officer took notes. Then she asked him to step off the plane with them for further verification. It was phrased as a request, but Michael knew it wasn't optional. He stood, grabbed his backpack, and followed them up the aisle. Every passenger watched him go. Phones came out again. More recording, more assumptions. As Michael passed row 4, Vanessa looked up from her phone. Her expression was carefully neutral, but there was satisfaction in her eyes. She'd made her point. The man who challenged her was being removed by security while she remained comfortable in her seat. The officers led Michael through the jet bridge and into a small office near the gate. They asked him to sit. One of them left to make a phone call, while the other asked Michael to walk through the entire incident again, from the moment he boarded until now. Michael recounted everything. The officer asked if anyone else had witnessed the exchange. Michael mentioned the flight attendant, the supervisor, and the dozen passengers who'd been recording on their phones. The officer made more notes. She told Michael that the other passenger had filed a formal complaint alleging harassment and threatening behavior. She said that based on the initial report, they needed to verify his story before releasing him. Michael asked how long that would take. The officer said she didn't know. He sat there for 40 minutes while they made calls and reviewed flight manifests. Through the office window, he could see Vanessa walking past with her designer handbag, free to leave while he was detained for questioning. She didn't look toward the office, but Michael knew she was aware of exactly where he was. Finally, the first officer returned with the flight supervisor. They'd reviewed the seating records, confirmed Michael's ticket and identification, and interviewed the crew. The officer told Michael he was free to go. She added that the complaint would remain on file, but that no further action would be taken at this time. Michael asked if the other passenger would face any consequences for filing a false report. The officer said that wasn't her department and that he could file a counter-complaint if he wished. She handed him a form. Michael took it, but didn't fill it out. Not yet. By the time he left the office, the gate area had cleared. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his assistant and 2 from members of his executive team. He'd also received a text from Emma asking if he'd landed safely. He texted her back first, telling her everything was fine and that he'd call her before bed. Then he opened his email. The first message that caught his attention was from his chief communications officer. The subject line read, "Urgent, media inquiry." Michael opened it and felt something cold settle in his stomach. Someone had posted a video from the flight, 12 seconds of footage showing him standing over Vanessa's seat, her looking up at him with an expression that could be read as fear, and the flight attendant stepping between them. The caption claimed that a man had tried to force a woman out of her seat and became aggressive when confronted. The video had been uploaded 2 hours ago. It already had 40,000 views and hundreds of comments. Most of them condemned Michael, calling him entitled, aggressive, threatening. A few pointed out that the video was clearly edited, that it didn't show what happened before or after, but those voices were drowned out by the outrage. His communications officer had attached a draft statement denying the allegations and explaining the actual sequence of events. But Michael knew how these things worked. Statements didn't matter once a narrative took hold. The video showed what people wanted to see, a man intimidating a woman. Privilege trying to assert itself, the kind of behavior that deserved public shaming. He forwarded the email to his general counsel with instructions to begin documenting everything. Then he called his assistant and told her to clear his morning schedule. The logistics meeting would have to wait. Michael took a car to his hotel in the financial district. The driver recognized him from the video. He didn't say anything, but Michael caught him glancing in the rearview mirror several times, reassessing. When they arrived, Michael tipped him in cash and went.